Professor Jason Hall Spencer is Professor of Marine Biology at the University of Plymouth.
This talk is going to be much more focused on the Northwest Pacific Ocean, where there's this very, very strong current that sweeps up from the Philippines, past Japan, and then heads out across the Pacific Ocean. It's called the Kuroshiro current, which is bringing warm water that's actually quite low in carbon dioxide up from the tropics, and then it heads off across the Pacific Ocean. Now, as Sidney said, I'm mainly based at the University of Plymouth, but thanks to some very generous funding from the University of Tsukuba, who want to try to internationalize their research program, they've made me a professor there as well, and we're studying the effects of ocean acidification on seabed habitats. Now, of course, this isn't me on my own, so thanks to those guys for helping me do this bit of research. And a quick plug about this new textbook which has come out about the marine life Japan. It's the first textbook written in English about the species and the ecology of what lives in Japan. Okay, so a bit of bad news really is that in 2016, 70% of Japan's biggest coral reef died off because of warming of the water. It exceeded the temperature that these corals could tolerate. They expelled their symbiotic zooxanthellae and subsequently died. So this is clearly an effect of global warming, because we know from the geological past that these mass bleaching events just didn't happen. And on top of that, the United Nations put out this report saying that basically we're in the midst of a biodiversity crisis and an extinction of organisms. But they used at the front cover this iconic picture of a sea turtle, because sea turtles are actually not endangered anymore. Human activities have helped them, and their populations are on the rise. So this is this provides hope really that the raw materials for rebuilding ocean life are still there. So even though we're in this crisis at present, it's not all lost in terms of the oceans, because a lot of what the raw ingredients are there to rebuild the biodiversity. But if you imagine we're traveling on planet Earth through space, the only inhabitable planet as far as we know in the whole universe for humans, and you look at a readout of what's going on in terms of the biosphere, it doesn't look good, because since the 1950s there's been a big step change in the rate at which we're changing the planet system. We emitted in 2020 about 10 billion tons of carbon dioxide per year. Almost all of that came from the burning of fossil fuels, so things like oil, gas and coal. But some of it came from chopping down virgin rainforests in places like Brazil or Borneo. Of that 10 billion tons of carbon that we are emitting to the atmosphere, 50% of it stays in the atmosphere and contributes to the warming of our planet. About a quarter is taken up by vegetation, and a quarter of it enters the ocean by diffusion. Now, to put that into context, that's 24 million tons of carbon dioxide every single day are entering the oceans, which is equivalent to the weight of a bowling ball. Okay, you know, bowling balls are really heavy. That's the equivalent of a bowling ball per person going into the ocean every single day. Now, we can measure the effects of this chemically in places like the South China Sea. So this is the South China Sea here. There's a long-term monitoring station where they've been assessing the amount of carbon dioxide in the water and the pH of the water. And actually the amount of carbon dioxide in the water since 1999 has been rising steadily, because the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has been diffusing into that water mass steadily. So we've already seen a 34% increase in the amount of protons in the water. And by 2100, they think there'd be more than 150% increase in the amount of protons in the water. So that's actually a big increase in the acidity, even though on the logarithmic scale of pH, that seems like a very small change. In fact, it's a big change in the acidity of the water. Now, that's not all that's happening to the world's oceans, of course. So bad management, by which I mean things like overfishing or inappropriate reclamation of the sea defences, natural sea defences, the effects of pollutants, like, for example, sewage, they both contribute to oceans of stress. But all these other things, deoxygenation, warming, ocean acidification, and sea level rise, are all related to carbon dioxide emissions. So clearly, if we want to alleviate stress to the oceans, then 4 of these out of the 6 major stresses can be alleviated by dealing with carbon dioxide emissions. And I think what we need at this juncture is, instead of science focused at the problems that are caused by this stress, we could change the argument around and have science that's focused at the advantages to be gained for humanity of adhering to things like the Convention on Biodiversity, the Paris Agreement, and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals over the next 10 years. Because if we have work that's focused at the benefits to society, that's probably more motivational than looking at what we lose if we don't adhere to those things. Now, in my work, what I tend to use is gradients in ocean conditions to show what the real world benefits are of meeting the SDGs, Convention on Biodiversity, and the Paris Agreement, and to find out what the benefits are to people, to economies, to happiness and mental health and ocean life by adhering to those goals. And one of the gradients that's very useful for doing this sort of work is the steep gradients in carbonate chemistry that occur around carbon dioxide seeps. Now, because this is a talk about seabed habitats, here's a photo of the seabed, and it's showing you pretty much what you see wherever you go with a mask and snorkel when you poke your head under the water to look at what's there. So this could have been taken in Alaska, it could have been taken in Papua New Guinea, it could have been taken more or less anywhere, because you see the same sorts of things. In fact, this was taken in the Mediterranean Sea. And what you've got a camouflaged fish, a small fish hiding in the background. So points, bonus points if you spotted them. You've got a variety of coralline algae. So this is a branched coralline algae that can flex in the waves. A lot of it, though, is encrusting, so it's growing on rock. You've got some colourful sponges here. Here's an orange one. This is a spiky sea urchin. There's little tiny white serpulid worms that you can just about see there. And then some fleshy seaweeds, which are this the green colour in the background. Now that's very typical for what you get in shallow waters. You can see the sea surface in the background there. So hopefully you saw that the pink algae, for example, completely disappear. There aren't any sea urchins in this picture, and there aren't any serpulid polychaetes that are white. In fact, almost everything that's calcified, made of calcium carbonate, has disappeared from this picture, and it's been replaced by greens and olives, which are diatoms and brown algae. But this paper, we made basically analysed different types of seabed habitat that had biogenic reefs, so corals and seagrasses and mussel beds, those sorts of things. We looked at the effects of ocean acidification on the diversity of those habitats. And these are some key data from that paper. So this is pH along the x-axis going from normal down to lower and lower pH in Papua New Guinea, where those carbon dioxide seeps are. And as you lower the pH of the water, going closer to the CO2 seeps, you get less and less diversity of the corals. Now, Japan is a very, very long chain of islands that extend from very cold regions in the north, where there's kelp forests on the seabed in shallow water, right down to Okinawa and other islands in the south, where there are coral reefs, because it's tropical. And unfortunately, it's so tropical and there's so much warming there that here's a picture of a coral that's bleached in the south of Japan because of warming. So what we're trying to do with this work is show society and show scientists that if we avoid this scenario and keep things back towards the lower levels of CO2, then there are lots of benefits, societal benefits to be gained from doing so. Okay, so there's been a 40% increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide since the start of the Industrial Revolution. That's increased the acidity of the ocean by 26%. There's been about 170%, there's going to be a 170% increase in ocean acidity by 2100 if we carry on with emissions as we are. And that's a rate that's 10 times faster than anything seen for the last 55 million years. So it's a massive experiment we're doing with the ocean. And the ocean, as I said earlier, is absorbing 24 million tons of carbon dioxide every single day. Now, there's some pretty big decisions to be made over this decade, which the United Nations has called the Ocean Decade, because it realizes the urgency for humanity of looking after the ocean properly. A report by a colleague of mine called Dan LaFoley has set out 8 actions that really need to be addressed now to secure the health of seabed habitats worldwide, one of which, top of the list, is to rigorously address global warming and limit surface temperature rises to 1.5 degrees by 2100, as this is one of the preeminent factors that's driving change in the ocean. It's what's causing oxygen loss in the Bay and Bengal, for example. What's needed is a robust and comprehensive high seas treaty, because beyond the EEZs of the countries worldwide, it's like the Wild West, and people can do what they want without any rules. What's needed within marine protected areas, and the UK is a very, very bad example of this, is effective management that reduces highly damaging activities that smash seabed habitats. So on paper, we've got quite a nice looking network of marine conservation zones around the UK, but in fact, they're pathetic because they don't remove highly damaging towed demersal gear, things like scallop dredges or otter trawls, or even electro fishing trawls that can still take place around many parts of the world within so-called marine protected areas. What's needed is a precautionary pause on seabed mining, because we don't know what the long-term effects of that will be. The data aren't there yet. End needs to take place to overfishing and destructive fishing practices. We need to reduce marine pollution, especially sewage pollution. I mean, I was in Brazil in January and could see very large areas of the coast highly polluted by sewage, which was having negative impacts on the seabed habitats and even causing oxygen loss during heatwave periods. And we need financial mechanisms for ocean management and protection. For example, it's becoming clear to me, at least, that it's not the governments that have got the power to protect the seabed habitats, it's the giant multinational corporations with fingers that are tendrils that go across the world that can really make a difference in terms of ocean protection. And lastly on that list is scaling up data gathering and data sharing in an open and accessible way, rather than being locked in, for example, journals that people can't afford to pay for. Okay, so with that, thanks, Sidi, for the invitation, and thank you all that have dialed in for your attention.